Title and topic go far behind what can be covered exhaustively within 30 minutes. I'm currently inundated with articles and reports on the so-called German Autumn, Deutscher Herbst, of 1977. Perusing these publications, I get emotionally submerged, as long as this morning too. In that time, there and then, reconnecting with my feelings and memories, my ambivalences towards violence in politics, as well as power and morality. Just a short while ago, my wife and I watched a documentary about the music festival on the Isle of Wight. The concert took place only 1 year after Woodstock and ended in drugs and violence. Love and peace had transformed into drug dependency and violence. Thesis 1. We failed in our attempt to build a counterworld of love and equality. There is no real life in the wrong one. Let me begin with a quotation in retrospect. In his book Chicha Shit, published in 1984, the journalist Klaus Hartung wrote about the transitional period between the 60s and the 70s in Germany, their different sentiments and contents. I quote, "The no-protest zone in front of the Schöneberger municipality was breached. A demonstration of stewards alternating between 100 stewards and a single demonstrator was organized, was declared a walking demonstration when demonstrating on the Kudamm, West Berlin's foremost boulevard, was disallowed. Throwing paint-filled eggs at the America House, then there was the pudding assassination of Vice President Humphrey. Nothing, however, would be more wrong than seeing primarily softies' approach therein. Even less would it have been possible to distinguish between peaceful demonstrators and violent acts, or protesters and violent participants. In all those cunningly staged actions, the line between game, protest, symbolic violence, and real attack remained blurred. There was a constant attempt at destroying whatever shape the ruling power took, or at anything it hid behind, like restrictions imposed on demonstrators or any prohibitions either by mimicry or thought direct confrontation. The apparatus of oppression, which was perceived, foremost the police, later also the judiciary, were to be exposed. This was to be done in a manner leaving the authorities helpless, letting them miss their target despite all their powerful weaponry. Because they could never know if their opponent avowed himself to the right of the revolutionary to take the streets or exercised his right of freedom of demonstration as a citizen. In 1967, I was 14 years old, living in Brussels, Belgium. Here this one too. Mentally, by our perception and actions, we are to some degree the extended arm, the continuation of our parents and forebears. We act in their succession. Unknowingly, we perceive ourselves as the willing helpers of our ancestors in reaching the goals they rapidly fell short to achieve. My father was a survivor of National Socialism, a survivor of the Shoah. He was born in 1922 to an assimilated Jewish family in Aachen, Aix-la-Chapelle, and became an illegal citizen after 1935. My grandfather was a member of an organization helping Jews and anti-fascists escape into exile to Belgium and Holland. The network's cover was blown, and so his family had to flee to Brussels too. After the German invasion of Belgium in 1940, my father, my grandfather, and two of my great-uncles were arrested and deported to a detention center in southern France. My father survived this concentration camp of detention in South France, Saint-Cyprien, for 3 years until he managed to escape. He joined the armed resistance against the German occupation and their French collaborators. When, after the Allied landings, General de Gaulle integrated the resistance fighters into his army, my father took also part in the liberation of Alsace and the Palatinate. My mother, born in 1927 in the Palatinate, as a young girl, she helped her aunt, my grand-aunt, to transport illegal communist pamphlets from the interior Palatinate to the Saarland. After the war, she assisted my father as a translator during the interrogation of Nazis apprehended by the French occupying power. My father, on behalf of the French military government, investigated the medical and psychiatric atrocities committed by the National Socialists. This was about euthanasia, compulsory treatments, and pseudo-medical experiments. Much later, I was to become an actively participating member of the German anti-psychiatry movement. I consider this the point where systemic thinking sets in. This attitude toward the analysis of mental health I learned from Félix Guattari, Gilles Deleuze, and Michel Foucault. From 1977 to 1984, we worked together as part of my time at La Borde, the first anti-psychiatric clinic in France. I just switched the pictures. This picture I found after the death of my mother, and it's my father, and you just see behind him some French people laughing and very polite, looking at him. I asked him years before, why put they such distance between you and on the street? And he said, well, they saw for the first time after the liberation a French soldier. You see behind even a colonial soldier. They fought in very hard situations, especially with Jews and colonial elements. This is in '69, my father and my mother being diplomats at the German embassy. They were founders of the common market. They want to live in peace. And in their mind and in their goal, living in peace, the only way to live in peace in Western Europe was to build up a free market and in unified Western Europe. Here on the right side, you saw my father in the attack against SS Division Das Reich. And the guy with the gun is my father. They freed Castres. And Castres was the biggest jail from the SS. 125 resistance fighters were tortured in Castres, and they freed Castres. And this was the guerrilla group called 35e Brigade, 35 Brigade, all of them Jewish, all of them flew out of concentration camps, and even the young boy in front was 2 years in a concentration camp. And this was the group in which my father acted in a terrorist way. Okay. My mother was born in 27 in the Palatinate. As a young girl, she helped her aunt, my grand aunt, to transport illegal communist pamphlets from the interior Palatinate to the Saarland. She was in another part of the resistance. That's why I repeat that. And in the discussions in the family, we had a kind of laughing contradiction between my mother and my father. The real resistance was the armed resistance. And the popular resistance and the non-acceptable resistance was printing flyers, tract, distributing these tracts. But we all knew that only both ways of resistance brought the future, brought the liberation. Both forms of civil resistance and armed resistance. The onset of the history of terror of the New Left has been commonly pinpointed to the 2nd of June 1967. On this day, the student Benno Ohnesorg was shot and killed by a police officer during a counter-demonstration against the visit of the Shah of Persia. Much later, that police officer was revealed to have been an agent of the East German secret police, the Stasi. The history of post-war Germany can be more complicated than we think. Already in the 18th of December of 1964, on the occasion of Maurice Tshombe's visit to Berlin, students, apprentices and pupils had been rioting. Tshombe was the one who ordered the murder of Patrice Lumumba, then figurehead of the anti-colonial struggle. So Ralph Reinders, a friend and comrade of mine, dated the militant resistance, at least with respect to West Berlin, back to the concert by the Rolling Stones to the year 1965 at the Berliner Waldbühne. Apprentices, pupils and even students went on a rampage, taking the place completely apart and going and pelting arriving police with stones and slats. From there, a movement originated which became an amalgamation of pupils, apprentices, or any maladjusted, who were also joined by runaway orphans. For the first time in Germany had there been spontaneous resistance rising against the persistent everyday oppression. Please bear in mind that at that time corporal punishment for pupils and apprentices was still openly condoned. Tell you again, 65. This was yet another one of the leftovers of Wilhelminian, followed by National Socialist pedagogy. Bomin Maumann, writing as an activist and insider from the 883, an underground magazine of the radical left, characterized its sentiments and attitudes thus. Life, the way it has been spinning off so far, seems pointless to us, barren and inhuman. We are trying to break out somehow to experience happiness, tenderness, and mutuality, such as what this civil society denies us. We are appalled by the abominable prospect of having to work and spend a whole lifetime under these prevailing conditions. Thus, we are turning away from all that and towards alcohol and hashish, to languish without worrying any longer about anything. Soon enough, so, we must realize that even then, the system will not leave us in peace. The rulers let out the cops to round us up. Then there's a problem about the money. This animalist society has managed to arrange everything the way that everyone must take part in it or perish in the gutter. Every day I can see the victims of that oppression. I can understand the history of capitalism through their biographies. As long as the economical conditions remain unchanged, life cannot be human. There's only one way out. The social world revolution, global civil war. Just as Aldrich Cleaver puts it, we shall have our manhood, we shall have it, or the earth will be leveled by our attempts to gain it. Destroy what destroys you. The ingredients of this world were rock and roll and a sense of not going to accept any more of what could be perceived as the continuation of a past German mindset, namely an unfettered obedience and dull trust in authority, and ready submission to the gentrified capitalist rat race and its etiquette, which were even more cemented during the National Socialist time. The roster manting from these years had to be purged. It was indeed still hanging in the air. While it was on 8 May 45 that the National Socialists capitulated and World War II ended, this was an no-account 0 hour. The predominating sentiment lived on end, especially so did the individuals who remained practically unabated in their former positions serving state and government, put going about their business as usual. We talked about yesterday. Same persons had the same functions. Nazis. In February 1972, the German and then Social Democrat government passed the so-called Radicals Decree. Civil servants and apprentice teachers had to certify not to have been in contact and or even less so been a member of any subversive organization, and that they were and would have been in agreement with the free democratic basic order. Free. Nothing was free. What should have happened in 1945 after the liberation, yet was never really implemented to much consequence, was finally applied with extreme vigor, but only targeting the left and the progressive. Thesis 3. Social and political resistance movements surge and scatter. They run aground on the question of violence as well as by their own scattering. Close to the demise of the movement of the 68 generation in Germany, the rallying cry was issued for the long march through the institutions. Leftist as well as progressive ideas were to be thought right to the core of their establishment. Very few, however, thought such a concept possible to grow accustomed to. On 2nd of April 1968, Andreas Baader and Gudrun Enslin set 2 fires in 2 department stores in Frankfurt as a protest against the Vietnam War. Little damage was caused. This is commonly regarded as the birth of the Red Army fraction, RAF. A substantial number of its members came from the SPK, the Socialist Patients Collective. This group endeavored to be able to turn mental illness into a weapon. It liberated psychiatric patients from the mental institutions, providing them with housing and space to live and to be free. All that was common knowledge, which I already knew as a student at school, which might partially explain my initial sympathy for this formation. Pretty soon, the founding members of the RAF, Red Army Fraction, were arrested and battle for the liberation ensued, while the other objective in the revolt against the state moved into the background. The group's aim was void of purpose, only orientated towards facilitating the escape and rescue of their own comrades. The West German state had reacted without mercy. From now on, it was all about the struggle against solidarity, confinement, and for the prisoners' reunion, and about their hunger strike. In November 1974, the so-called 2nd of June movement, an extremist group from Berlin, which had developed in parallel to the RAF, thought with a slightly different approach to the armed struggle, murdered the Superior Court Justice Günther von Drenkmann. They had taken revenge, as they announced, for the death of Holger Mainz, who had died just the day before by starvation and hunger strike, launched by the imprisoned RAF members. In a later statement released by the 2nd of June movement, the leaders responsible for the crime, and so I stop quoting. When I read this text 2 weeks ago, I nearly spit it. The terms used are so brutal, so cold. And I realized that using these words have nothing to do with it. You can read the text, you can have the text, read it. But I'm not d'accord. I don't agree translate this text. Okay. So brutal, immoral. Around 73, the revolutionary cells, the AZ, formed. They were an answer to the RAF, as well as the 2nd of June. Loss of purpose and focused on social conflicts in Germany. Even so, this group eventually succumbed as well to the blackmail strategy of already described engine of movement of the RAF. On 4th of July 76, the hijacking in Entebbe ended. This had been a conjoined operation between members of the revolutionary cells, RZ, and the Palestinian Commando, with the intention, among other things, to demand the release of the prisoners of Stammheim, the prison in which the RAF members of the first generation were arrested. In 1992, the revolutionary cells began to confront their own leftist anti-Semitism as well as that of the radical left at large, and also started debating this issue self-critically, which was not always met with overall approval. In an article titled, "We have to be as radical as the reality they stated." So again, the positions taken against anti-Semitism in the left is very clear. I will not read them, but you can read it. And I would like to discuss about racism and anti-Semitism into the left movement and into the radical movements, about disintegration of sense, common sense, and political analysis when struggle and violence gets into our hearts. The discussion is not finished. We lived Hamburg, and since yesterday we often talked about. I was brutalized by what's happening in Hamburg. Brutalized means I realized again that once we, was heißt Startschuss, we gave the first shot and developed aggressivity, violence, we cannot stop it. And it destroys us.